John.
Fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, assembled company, welcome to the World Storytelling Cafe. And tonight is a first. We are going to serialize a book. If Ali would mute himself. And Ali, mute yourself. I
Sorry,
can hear
John.
your family. And I'm jealous because I want to be down there having some food in Marrakesh now.
Sorry, my friend.
That's okay. So, anyway, and also that I've been very excited about, and for well since I first met her on the cafe, in fact, at this cafe. Hey, hello, and friend, and Paro Anand, and she's serializing book. We've never done this before. We were having a serialized version of a book because I just think it's such an important book. It's a book, Nomad's Land. And before she starts, I've got, yeah, please do. And it's available through all the usual online channels. If you want to avoid Amazon or not, there are other ways to get it. Just look it up on Google on how to get it online. It will give you about 3 different alternatives. Right, so we do that because Speaking Tiger, who is a publisher, would really love us to give it a plug whenever possible. Never mind. Hello, and but I also recommend that if you can just look at last weekend's Calcutta Literature Festival. There was a brilliant panel with Paro talking and a couple of other writers talking about what makes young people read. And there were a few bits that fascinated me. There was a brilliant discussion about gatekeepers. Well, you know, well, I'm not a gatekeeper. I'm a kicking down the gator or whatever it is. So,
Yeah.
so Para, it's wonderful to have you here, and it's wonderful so thank you very much for doing this serialized version of your story. Thank you. So I'm going to pass without further ado. We'll just let Mike get comfortable there, and if you take your seat, put on your ear, I shall pass you across to the fantastic Paro.
Thank you, John. And thank you, Ali, for always, being there, putting it together. And to the World Storytelling Cafe, I think, I've been feeling so almost embarrassedly self-indulgent, for a writer to have the opportunity to read a serialized version of a novel. It's a first for me. I've never done it before. I've been a bit nervous. I've been trying to practice because over the next few Wednesdays at exactly this time, I'm going to be reading more and more of this novel. And in fact, it's the first reading for me from my book. Um, I've done short excerpts of readings, of course, as well as on the World Storytelling Cafe and other places as well. But without further ado, as John would say, here is Nomad's Land. Mountain girls, both, children of forever skies and endless horizons. They are fed on yesterday's dreams and stories, told and retold endlessly. These dreams color their thoughts, guide their paths, even though these dreams are not their own. For their own dreams are not fed by memories of homelands and yesterdays and long ago's that they have never seen, and futures of what could have, should have been, but never will be. They dream, these two girls, of living here today in the now. Their dreams are made up of a fight with a friend, the food they wanted to eat, the film they dreamt of acting in, those boots in the shop window, the boy they really wanted to talk to but didn't have the courage to. Their dreams are not of the world that their families have left behind. These were girls of forever skies and snow-clad mountains, yes, but that was a very, very long time ago. One remembered it some of the time. She had seen it, but she tried very hard. She tried her best not to remember. But sometimes the memory would be triggered unbidden and rise up to the top. Little things, the color of a rose, of the familiar smell of frying onions, rain on hot earth. But these were snatches of memory, no more than a little swatch, not the whole swaths of memory and remembrance like her mother and grandmother had. The other girl had no memory at all, for she was born after her family had fled what once was their homeland, when the genocide began. She was born in this foreign land and only knew of home from the memories of her mother and others. The fabric of what they were so enveloped in. Her mother was so enveloped that she was blind to everything all around her. She didn't see it, she didn't smell it, she didn't want to. It smothered her. Her mother, she came alive when she lived in yesterday and died a little bit every time the now, the here confronted her. Yes, these were girls who had their little dreams, dreams of the now, little girl dreams, although their elders fed them with bigger dreams and promises nurtured by the waters of yesterday, fed by the fertile land of long ago dreams, when everything seemed to have been beautiful and fragrant and plenty. There was always enough and more. But those dreams were dust now, dry and colorless, brittle and useless, lying in corners of their sad hearts. All the dreams of yesterday were now tied into bundles to be taken out, rummaged through. Sometimes one of them brought out a memory and held it shimmering against the light. Gossamer dreams, and caressed them. But the treasured memory was bundled back and locked away again in case someone stole it, or maybe it would fade and wear away if they looked at it too often. And yet, it was the dreams that nurtured them. It was the dreams and nothing else. But both girls, they wanted to move forward, not back. There was nothing there for them in the left behind lands. Shana, that's one of the girls, she protested sometimes. We can't go on living in mourning forever. But her words were met with silent disapproval. Or her mother's favorite line, you'll never understand. And Shana wanted to rage back and say, yes, you're right, I will never understand. Why do you expect me to? But she didn't say it out loud. She knew she didn't have to. She knew that they were going to be in mourning forever. Morning. Morning had come that morning. In school nowadays, more and more desks began to empty out as one by one families of Shana's people began to leave. The lines once invisible between the us and the them were hardening, becoming straighter, becoming higher, becoming more visible, until Shana was feeling more like me against them, against them, against. At first, the differences were little. Diwali wasn't celebrated in school anymore, the Hindu festival of Diwali. But meanwhile, the leaving became more of a flood of fleeing humanity. Shana and her mother went to see the relatives of. There was weeping and wailing and pushing and shoving. And Shana got separated from her mother and almost got swept into a bus whose engines were already revving, dying to leave. There had been a fight between her parents that night. Her mother was distraught, feeling so vulnerable and left behind. We're the only ones left, she urged her father. But her father said, we have our friends. They will not let us down. And that didn't go down well with her mother. Dinner was a meal scraped together that night from leftovers as her mother curled up in bed, weeping, wanting to become a refugee. This became a regular occurrence. The fights between her families, the phone calls from the city, from Delhi, from her grandparents, urging them, leave, leave, leave before it's too late. But her father would keep saying, these are our friends. They'll always be our friends. They're not going to let anything happen to us. And Huma, Shana's best friend, repeated the same lines. Nothing will happen to you and your family, Shana. You're one of us. But even then, even as she said it, a little red flag went up in Shana's heart. Am I one of us? But then something did happen. So suddenly, like smoke, a wisp that rises and floats away, taking its very presence with it. Shana hoped that her father's spirit had risen straight up with the smoke towards the skies. She hoped he had not suffered too much when he chose to stay in his shop as it burned down, as it was burned down, taking her father with it. He left eventually, and he left them behind. There was a rush of leaving, a rush of wailing. There was the fear of leaving, a fear of being left behind. Shana had not wept. There weren't too many friends to say goodbye to. Most of them had already left, and those who were still here would never leave. They were going to take over her house and what had been her life so far. And they weren't friends anyhow. At least they weren't friends now, though they had been once. Friendships were split down the middle. Like curdled milk, they separated and could not be joined again. You were either on one side or the other. You couldn't be on both. No one was. Shana raged at the injustice that one side could stay and the other must leave. Who were they to decide that it was her side that must go? But she held her tongue as she held on to the little bundle of her father's clothes and seethed silently in her heart. She thought she saw her once best friend Uma racing down the hillside, running towards the bus stop, maybe, maybe to say hello or one last goodbye. But Shana had turned away. As far as she was concerned, Huma was a friend no longer. Their friendship had died along with her father. Her father had died. Shana shut her eyes against her tears. She did not want to grace this wretched land with her tears anymore. As the bus turned to leave the final bend at the Banehal Pass, a wail went up. They were homeless refugees now. It had been decided who could stay and who must leave. And they had landed on the wrong side, the side of leaving, the side of never coming back. And now Pema's story, the other girl, because this is a story of two little girls from two displaced communities. Pema raged too. She was a fighter. She fought for justice, for fair play, and for all that she thought wasn't right. If she saw a child being bullied, she would stand up. She would throw protective arms. But most of all, she fought for animals who couldn't fight for themselves. Pema's family would never approve. The only one who really got her and understood her and encouraged her was her grandmother, her beloved, crinkly-eyed, ever-smiling Mola, as her people called their grandmothers. Her smile was so big and broad that it swallowed her eyes up. You could never see her smile and her eyes at the same time. Her grandmother understood animals, especially dogs, because she had loved them too. She told Pema about the beautiful mountain dogs in the land of their origin. They are huge, as big as the big black buffalo here, she'd say with a laugh. No, Pema would protest. Of course they can't be that big. Well, they appear to be that big, and if one is coming at you, there's nothing you can really do. But they don't attack if they have accepted you as one of their pack. If you belong to them, then no one will be able to touch a hair on your body. Pema giggled, Mola, don't you mean it the other way around? If you have accepted them, not they you. No, child. I mean that the mountain dogs accept or reject you. They read your heart and they only admit into their pack those who are true of heart. To be loved by one of these dogs is an honor, a privilege, cannot be bought. I know they would accept you, Pema, you with your open heart and kindness and ready smile. Well, Pema hugged her grandmother tight. Oof! Now you've broken rib number 2, Grandma would laugh. She always broke rib number 2. You have my support, Grandma would say. Always and forever? Asked Pema, needing to know that she had her grandma's support. Always and forever. Her grandma would smile and stroke her face, knowing that it would not be always and forever. How could it be? And Pema, heart of hearts, knew too that it couldn't be forever. But she couldn't imagine life without Mola. The thought was too dreadful. Once she had said to her grandma, Mola, you always do things for me. Tell me what I can do for you. But Mola had laughed and said something about in the Kushavan way, because they belonged to the Kushavan tribe. In the Kushavan way, love always flows downwards from elders to the younger ones. For who has ever seen a stream flowing upwards? And love is like water, giving, flowing downwards always. Pema had made her promise then that if she ever needed something, Pema would be the person she would call upon. I'll hold you to that, said Mola, before launching into one of her stories of the old days, the old ways. Pema was always impatient when her parents or one of the many uncles and aunts who lived all around them, for they lived in their own community, talked of the old days. But Mola talked about them as though they were wonderful stories, full of adventure and magic. It was from Mola that Pema learned to love her roots, at least a little. She came from the proud race of Kushavans who had lived in the Zarim Basin. The massive Kushava range of mountains lay to the northeast of their beautiful valley just beyond India. Her people were nomads who had wandered the great plateau freely with their families. With animals to help them, children were born and elders died while they roamed. For them, the sense of belonging and home came within minutes, as soon as they had pitched their yak wool tents and hung cradles for the new babies to sleep in, where animals could pasture. They belonged to the open world, to the open skies. This world belonged to them. They needed no passports, no permits. There was an umbrella term for them all, the Kushavans. It literally meant the happy people. The term referred to several tribes, the Zarims, the Sonamargs, the high altitude Kushaha. Pema knew that she belonged to this last sub-tribe, the ones who lived in the happiest part of the plateau, the highest. They were the happiest and the bravest. Everywhere they went, they were welcomed. People needed them, their wool, their salt that they brought from the mountains. They needed them for their seemingly infinite knowledge of roots and leaves and barks of plants, from which they made potions and lotions, medicines that were pounded up, leaves that were crushed, medicines that closed open wounds and stilled unwanted shakings. As for the Kushahas, they needed the people for food and shelter if the weather was too severe up in the high mountains, and sometimes for medicine if someone was too sick for the old ways. But most of all, the plains people and the tribes needed each other for their stories. The nomads brought stories of strange creatures in dark crevices, creatures that were sometimes violent and evil, but mostly kind and helpful. They could bestow magic upon you, and you could cover vast distances on winged feet, or carve a yak with no trouble or time being consumed. They could hold off a snowstorm or a high wind as your caravan sought shelter. Though sometimes the high wind was not just a wind, but a monster, an enemy. There were the wise elders, the Kurmajo, the elder men, the Kurmaji, the elder women. There weren't many of them left now, so the words to describe them had almost ceased to exist. They were the closest that the Kushavans had to priests. Mullah said that they could tame the wind and storm. They could wrap the whistling wind on their fingers and fling it towards those who meant to cause you trouble. These typhoon-like winds could lift anything, trucks, homes, trees, and wicked men. The Kurmaji and Kurmajo dealt with major issues. For the rest, the people continued to commune directly with their God. They didn't have need for a go-between priest. And from the plains people, the nomads came to know the news of the big folks, the leaders, the government. Ah, the government. That is how they got to know that the big city folk had decided that nomads had no place in this world. Nor could the world belong to them. Whoever thought of such nonsense? Why? Because here were a people who lived without rules, without laws, hovering over their heads like swords, and this could not possibly be allowed. So they made laws that would govern the nomads, laws that governed them, although they knew nothing about them. The nomads would need permits and passports from here on. They would not be allowed to cross borders. They were to be given birth and death certificates. And anyone who couldn't produce their papers would be prosecuted, jailed. This last word brought a shudder to the spine of the tribe as they shared their hookahs at night. They traded stories. The thought of being locked up in a small dark room was their idea of what hell must look like. These people of endless plateaus and forever skies could not live in a house, let alone a locked room, a room where light and air could only poke at, but not enter. And from jail, they would be tried in unknown courts and then be forced to leave. But where would they go? These pastures were their homes. They had nowhere else. For nomads have no land. The tribesmen could not understand how they were to adapt to these rules. What about marriages, births? How were these to be certified? It had never been done. Because these people's ways were so different. But different causes suspicion in those who would have you live by laws and lines. The children were all brothers, and the children by tribe, not by mere blood and DNA. Then how was a birth certificate to be made? Who was to be the mother? Who the father? The children belonged to the whole tribe. But plains people could not and would not try to understand that they lived by their own rules. There were rules, but it was their way. But no, it wasn't to be. But all that was about to change. It happened when there was a wedding in the plains. It was the time of the year when the people from the high altitudes arrived in the plains. At this wedding of the plains people, there was feasting and merriment, clothes and jewelry such as no one had ever seen before. The father and brother of the bride had lived a long time in the city and earned much and come back laden with gold and goods for the wedding. There had been a display of the dowry laid out for all to see and admire and be jealous about. But as the bride was ready, It was discovered with intense horror. The jewelry was gone. It is a story as old as time. And another story as old as time was beginning to unfold as well. As the hue and cry started up, and the family was joined by neighbors um, and well wishers to find the culprit, it was the recently arrived nomads on whom the suspicion fell. It is always the outsiders who get blamed first. The needle of suspicion is blind to those within the circle, and the nomads were outside. The blame fell on a group of 4 young men of Kushavans who were standing in front of a television shop watching a game show with interest. They were caught and found guilty, not because there was any conclusive proof, but because they all wondered, who else could it be? If they were looking at gadgets in the shop they were standing in front of, they must have had a promise of money coming in. Otherwise, why would they have been looking into that shop? Of course, none of the city people had the sense to wonder what a nomadic people would do with gadgets. They had no electricity. They had no way of carting heavy and useless gadgets around. Of course, if the nomads hadn't arrived just then, maybe the real culprits would have been caught. Maybe the jewelry would have been recovered. But as it was, that didn't happen. The nomads were being chased and they scattered, trying to reach back up the hillsides, never to be heard of again. Those who were caught were never heard of again. The 4 young men were taken away in a cart with small windows, and their desperate eyes were the last things that were seen of them. Those who tried to save them or argue with the police were handcuffed and beaten. And it wasn't long before a mob gathered and began feeding off the frenzy of violence. Most of the nomads managed to escape with cuts and bruises and bumps on their skulls. But there were some who made a desperate attempt to run on broken legs. Others were caught and beaten as they fell in their attempts to flee. It was a free-for-all. Some of the plains people joined in the seething, boiling mobs of violence only because others were doing it. They didn't even know why or who. They just grabbed whatever weapon they could lay their hands on and lashed out wildly. That is the nature of a mob. When the nomads who could reach the safety of the high plateau, they gathered to take stock. Finding family missing, they just didn't know what to do, for few had the courage to return. As for the plains people, they decided that all nomads would have to be registered or never come back here again. The unknown is dangerous. I'm just going to skip forward a little bit to how Pema grew up with the stories, but never the whole story. For there were people killed of her tribe. There were children stolen. There were women raped. And those who could gathered what they could, gathered who they could, and fled into anonymity and disappeared within the city. And the tribe ceased to exist forevermore. John, how much time do we have more? So, sorry, you're on mute.
Yep. That's, you'd think after a year of lockdown and Zoom, I'd know to unmute myself. I think probably that is a really good place to pause, isn't it? That's my feeling.
Yeah.
It's just incredible, and it's a lot to take in, and it's just a very important. It's so important. And thank you, Mike. Have you got anything to say apart from wow?
I think wow pretty much sums it up. It's really good, really enjoying it, and can't wait till next Wednesday.
Well, I must point this out. I think Paro is going to pop in a bit before on Monday. You're popping into David Thompson's The Stories of Hope.
Yes.
I'll just give that a plug right now, David, for you. There's Jackie Ross and David's taken the lead on that, and but Paro's going to be there. Probably some other people, and that's all part of our. I'm just getting in the odd plug here for excuse me, Paro, for a second while we're on a plug for in the UK. It's National Storytelling Week next week. So we've got the program starts on Friday night with Ian Douglas telling stories. Then we've got Saturday morning at 10 o'clock is a kind of open mic for India and the Far East and Australasia, because we're doing a 10 o'clock in the morning UK time. So, you know, Paro kindly stays up all night to speak to us, but, you know, other people, we ought to give other people a chance.
It's past midnight now.
Yeah, come back if you want, Paro. And then Sunday, we're doing a sort of celebration of the people that have kept things going on Zoom. A lot of the regular stuff that's gone on to Zoom, and people, you know, there's a kind of Paro, you know all about snobbishness in the publishing world, you know, and there's a kind of snobbishness in the storytelling world, you know. Oh, it's not real. It's, you know, when can we go out and see people? Well, you know, no one's looking at the positive side. Oh, people are, but you know, with people on all the platforms, people are coming in from all over the world, and I think it's something to celebrate. And those people, mainly women, actually, people like Maria Watson, that have kept it going. So Sunday's a celebration of that. Monday, as I mentioned, is David's hope stories of hope.
We got today, good up. We got Wu, the God doing that. We got like all met that low doing all up.
And we need, if this is a time we need hope. Tuesdays, of course, we've got our young international storytellers. Last Tuesday we had a young teller from Punjab. I keep saying the Punjab, it's Punjab. And we had a storyteller in Scotland that came from elsewhere. We had a storyteller in Gaza and another storyteller in England. So we had this young international sort of 12, 13-year-olds. Fantastic. Wednesday, of course, we have Paro back for part 2. And Friday, actually, I've got it wrong. This Friday is Eamon Keenan. Next Friday, Friday the 5th, is Ian Douglas. And then we just go on to our worldwide story round, where everyone is available on the 6th. And that's our storytelling week. I'm having a quiet time. And so, but for now, Paro, it's just magnificent, and I'm reminded of so many different people. You know, the whole. There's a friend of mine, a Romani gypsy playwright, and he writes. He's written a play where where the old woman in it just doesn't. Why would I need a birth certificate? I know I exist. Why do I need someone else to tell me I exist?
Yeah.
And then I'm reminded of Ali, this down in Morocco, the nomadic peoples there that used to cross over between Algeria and Morocco, and suddenly, and the whole artificiality of life as we accept it, and the genius of your book is to take all, is to invent a tribe. So it crosses all, it brings in all that stuff. It's just fantastic.
Oh,
I had a very nice interaction with a group of students from Mumbai in India, and they were all urging me to write a sequel to Nomad's Land because they really liked it so much. They'd all read the book. And I'm happy to say that yesterday I have submitted my next book to Penguin Random House. And that will be coming out this summer.
So it's Penguin and Random House, your next book. Brilliant, brilliant. So we'll all be able to get that. But Speaking Tiger, Speaking Tiger just needs so much credit for going into areas that other people won't. And I think it's a book that should be. This is my personal opinion, not that I'm biased at all, but no, I just think it's such an important subject. It should be on the bookshelf of every high school and secondary school library well, I'd say the world, but certainly in this country and through India and America could probably do. USA could probably do with it as well. But there's and we can't wait for the next bit, the next episode. David, you were trying to say something.
Ahmed, we know, but working on that story. What I working that the battle. My story, my book about of not about the business that are made. Are we living that story?
Oh, a little bit of the story. Yeah. So,
what I wrote.
Oh, a little bit of your story that you wrote. Fantastic. We're looking forward to Sunday. We can't wait till not Sunday, Monday. Monday. John, get your I'm just going to find my brain and put it back. Thank you. Monday. We can't wait. Jackie's going to be with you, so with Jackie and Paro, it can't, and David, it can't fail. It's going to be brilliant, and it's going to be a really important part of of our National Storytelling Week. So thank you, David, for arranging that. Thank you, Paro, for coming on tonight.
Thank you.
We wait with bated breath before next week, but for now, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for being our live audience, Mike and David. Ali, thank you for driving the bus, and I'll see you in about half hour's time. Again, take a break. Have a cup.
Okay, see you, John. Thank you.
Have a cup of tea between now and then. Cheers, Ali.
Cheers. Yeah.
Cheers, David. Bye.